This video is brought to you by Nebula Classes, where you can watch my brand new class, How to Make a Movie.
What the hell?
Hi, Patrick. Welcome home. Sorry about the whole knocking you out and leaving you on a deserted island thing. And while I'm apologizing for things, I should probably mention... Hello?
Patrick, Jesus, finally. I've been trying to reach you for weeks. You're 4 months late on rent. Look, we're coming to change the locks in the morning. You're being evicted.
No, that wasn't me. I wasn't even here. I was stuck on an island for the past year. That was another version of me from a parallel universe.
Yeah, sure, that's what they all say.
I should probably mention I stopped paying rent and instead spent all our money on these sweet things called NFTs. You probably don't know about them yet, but let me tell you, they are awesome and you are gonna thank me for this investment later. Well, I better get going. Happy trails, partner. Other Patrick. P.S. While you were gone, we hit a Patreon goal, so now you have to make a video about Zack Snyder. Fuck. Who am I? You sure you want to know? The story of my life is not for the faint of heart. If somebody said it was a happy little tale, if somebody told you I was just your average, ordinary guy, not a care in the world, somebody lied. You see, another version of me from a parallel universe showed up here, stranded me on a deserted island for a year and a half, and almost let an evil robot coconut kill everyone on the planet. And now, I'm back in a world that's moving faster than I remembered. One of my friends is dead, his brother moved away, and my other friend turned into some kind of crazy supervillain and escaped into the multiverse, and now a different version of her, who's kind of like a time cop or something, is living here in her place. So what I'm saying is, I'm feeling a little adrift. I seem to have found myself back at square one, smack dab in New York City, with no place to live, no prospect, and thanks to my alternate self, massive amounts of debt. Luckily for me though, that life-stealing jerk left a little bit of cash tucked away in a very obvious hiding spot. I have just enough money for 3 nights at an okay hotel. I mean, technically I could do a week at a terrible hotel, but come on, I just spent 18 months on a deserted island. I think I deserve a little room service. Okay, so I guess we're doing this again. Welcome to a new season of the show. I'm finally back here in good old civilization, and I've got an exciting new look. So I'll give you 5 seconds to finish reacting to that. Okay, we good? Great. So it turns out that other Patrick left me not just broke, but deep in debt. So if I'm gonna crawl out of this crippling financial ruin, then I guess I've gotta make videos again. Because in the words of Speed Racer, it's the only thing I know how to do, and I gotta do something. So let's talk about Spider-Man. That's a thing we all like. In the early to mid 2000s, Sam Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy was one of the biggest and most popular things around. It broke box office records and helped kick off the superhero movie boom that we all assumed would fade out eventually, but now seems like it will outlive us all. Raimi's Spider-Man largely defined the modern idea of the big screen superhero, updating what Richard Donner had done with the 1978 Superman for a new era, and in many ways, building the template for Marvel Studios. But over the past decade or so, the trilogy seemed to fall out of fashion with modern audiences. The goofy, sincere approach of those movies, with Tobey Maguire reciting poetry and dancing and crying all the time, was considered lame and old-fashioned compared to the cooler, snarkier vibe of the MCU. But recently, things have taken a turn. The foundation was laid over several years with the popularity of the bizarre Bully Maguire meme videos, built around re-editing footage from the Raimi films. But it really took hold of the zeitgeist last year with the release of Spider-Man No Way Home. That was obviously one of the biggest films of the century. I even heard about it on my island. So you don't need me to explain this, but I will anyway. Using some honestly pretty sweaty multiverse magic shenanigans, that movie brought several characters from the Raimi films into the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and once again, played by their original actors. We had Willem Dafoe, Alfred Molina, Thomas Hayden Church, and yep, even Tobey himself. And audiences went nuts. It turned out that distance had made the heart grow fonder, and suddenly everyone started going, huh, you know, those movies were actually pretty great. And speaking as someone who has always been a champion of the Raimi movies, as in I 100% believe that Spider-Man 2 is the best superhero movie ever made, when this happened, I felt, wait for it, here it comes, vindicated. Even in the current superhero-saturated media landscape, there are a lot of things that make the Raimi movies special. The inventive filmmaking and the still incredible action scenes, the heartfelt sincerity, completely unafraid of being corny, the deft mixture of tones as the movies are able to jump from wacky comedy to horror to old-fashioned melodrama. But there's one element that often gets overlooked, something these movies have done better than any other superhero movies before or since. I'm talking about the people. And no, not the top-billed main characters, I mean all the other people. The tiny roles, the bit parts. As the philosophers Sly and the Family Stone would say, everyday people. I'm talking about the vast collection of non-super civilians that Peter Parker encounters throughout the movies. You know who I'm talking about, like this guy, and her, and him, and those kids, and definitely him. What I'm saying is, Mr. Ditkovich, Peter Parker's mean Eastern European landlord, is actually one of the most important characters in the entire superhero movie genre. So as Mr. Ditkovich would say, give me rent. As in, please subscribe to my Patreon because I desperately need to find a place to live and pay rent there. Anyway, let's get into it. Think back to the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies, particularly the first two. Think of your favorite parts of those movies, your favorite moments, the ones that stand out the most clearly to you. Now, I've got a hunch here that I think is correct, that a lot of those moments in some way involve characters with tiny roles, played by actors not listed in the opening title sequences. Just people who pop up in one scene, maybe only with one line, but they make an impression. As much as these movies are ostensibly about a superhero fighting supervillains, or in some cases Macho Man Randy Savage, Raimi spends a ton of time focusing on and building up this world of everyday people throughout New York. And I don't just mean Aunt May and Mary Jane, it goes way beyond them. Obviously, there's the whole crew at the Daily Bugle, J. Jonah Jameson, Robbie Robertson, Betty Brant, and Hoffman. There's Mr. Ditkovich and his daughter Ursula. There's Dr. Kurt Connors at Peter's college, Peter's teacher in the first movie who says, "I kid you not," in this funny way that my friends and I in middle school quoted for years.
I kid you not.
The scientist talking about super spiders, Mr. Aziz at Joe's Pizza, Emily Deschanel who won't pay for the pizza.
I'm not paying for those.
The guy who says,
"He stole that guy's pizza!"
Hal Sparks in the elevator, Joel McHale as the bank manager, the garbage man who finds Spidey's suit. Is that enough? No, I'm gonna keep going. The woman who shouts, "Go Spidey, go!" The kids who see Peter do a flip, the violin lady singing the Spider-Man song,
Spider-Man, Spider-Man.
Octavia Spencer at the wrestling arena, the little girl he rescues from the fire, Peter's doctor, obviously all of Bruce Campbell's characters. Then we've got everyone on the train, there's Phil Lamar, and those kids who won't tell no one. Look, that's not even all of them. Throughout the movies, Raimi is constantly showing us how New Yorkers look at Spider-Man, whether visually, with shots looking up from the perspective of a person on the street, or with people straight up stating their opinions to the camera.
He stinks, and I don't like him.
In the first movie, Spider-Man's debut as a crime fighter is shown through a documentary-style montage, interviewing bystanders about what they think of the old webhead. Some of these people are played by established actors, like Lucy Lawless or Jim Norton, but some are also just non-actors, regular people that the production crew found and put in the movie, like these construction workers. You'll sometimes see people online bring up how many well-known actors had tiny roles in these movies before they were famous, like the aforementioned Joel McHale, Emily Deschanel, Joe Manganiello, Octavia Spencer, or Daniel Day Kim. And I think this speaks to Raimi's commitment to making every bit part feel like a real character. These are not a bunch of extras whose only existence is to wait there until Peter Parker shows up. These people feel like the stars of their own movies that Peter Parker happens to show up in. They make the New York of these movies feel like a real, thriving city, populated by a vibrant community of characters. Because if we're going to care about Spider-Man saving the people of New York, we have to actually get to know the people of New York. Probably the most widely mocked scene in the first Spider-Man movie is the one in which the Green Goblin drugs Spider-Man and has a chat with him on a rooftop, trying to convince him to quit the hero business and join his side. It is admittedly a little awkward visually. It's a conversation between two people wearing masks that cover their entire faces, with Willem Dafoe doing some real Super Sentai-style physical acting to try to make up for not having his face to emote with. And then the Goblin getting all casual and chilling there with Spider-Man looks a little silly. But despite all that, it's also the scene that articulates one of the most important themes of the series and Raimi's whole take on Spider-Man. It's right here, where the Green Goblin says,
"There are 8 million people in this city, and those teeming masses exist for the sole purpose of lifting the few exceptional people onto their shoulders. You, me, we're exceptional."
In his essay, Continually in the Making, Spider-Man's New York, writer Martin Flanagan argues that a central conflict in Raimi's first two Spider-Man movies is between the everyman and the patrician elite of the city. Flanagan writes that Raimi establishes Peter's growing bond with his fellow city dwellers and his level of comfort with a diverse citizenry, to show why, unlike Norman Osborn or Otto Octavius, he cannot conceive of using his powers in a way that would definitively separate him from the people on the streets. As I'm pretty sure we all know, Stan Lee and Steve Ditko's main conceit with Spider-Man, their master stroke that separated him from pretty much all other superheroes that had been created up to that point, was to make him an ordinary guy with ordinary problems, someone the readers could relate to. As Lee's narration at the end of Amazing Spider-Man #9 calls him, the superhero who could be you. Here's Stan rattling off the same talking points that he repeated in like 80,000 interviews over the years.
Now, I've told this so often that for all I know, it might even be true.
I've told this story so often it might even be true. I think most teenagers reading it thought to themselves, hey, that could be me, you know. So there certainly was that identification. So I think that made it relevant to everybody everywhere.
As a matter of fact, he's like the average guy, you got to admit.
In these movies, Norman Osborn is an incredibly wealthy industrialist. He owns a billion-dollar company named after himself. He lives in a huge penthouse in the middle of Manhattan. He wears suits. He is the embodiment of the patrician elite that Flanagan refers to. And when Peter Parker meets him at the beginning of the movie, he aspires to be like him, to use his talent for science to build a better, more comfortable life. And once all the spider business happens and Peter gains his amazing powers, he could join him. He could use those powers to become one of the elites, to be one of those exceptional people the Green Goblin talks about. And the same goes for Doc Ock and Spider-Man 2, another brilliant scientist that Peter looks up to, basically a father figure, who becomes obsessed with using his abilities to wield godlike power, not caring if he hurts regular people in the process. But Peter has to stop them, because what he understands is that no matter what spectacular physical feats he can perform, he will always be a member of those teeming masses. And so over and over throughout the movies, Raimi and co. develop that idea by making the teeming masses a vividly drawn group of people that populate this fictional New York. This separation between the elites and the everyman that the Green Goblin brings up isn't just between people with superpowers and everyone else. In his daily life, Peter Parker is constantly getting knocked back and defeated by those with a higher status in society. It starts in high school with Flash Thompson and the other bullies, but once he graduates and moves into Manhattan, he contends with so many more. Most obviously, there is J. Jonah Jameson, his boss at the Daily Bugle. There's the snooty usher who won't let him into the theater, the receptionist who refuses to pay for the pizzas, the bank manager who won't give him and Aunt May an account, Mr. Aziz who fires him from Joe's Pizza. And there's one more. I feel like, who am I forgetting?
Rent!
Oh yeah, Mr. Ditkovich. Peter's greedy landlord who, in every single scene, is demanding his rent payments.
Rent?
He literally snatches the cash out of Peter's hand and cuts him in line for the bathroom. I mean, honestly, this guy is one of the great villains of the entire trilogy. Like sure, Doc Ock has arms like an octopus, but Mr. Ditkovich has ears like a cat and eyes like a rodent. He's so cartoonish and memorable that you'd think he was created in the 60s by Lee and Ditko. Wait a minute. Ditkovich. Anyway, my point is that even among the teeming masses, Peter is low status. But it's not all doom and gloom for old P.D. Parker. Not everyone in the city hates him. Almost as often as he gets dumped on, he has genuine moments of connection and support with regular people.
Hey, chin up, okay?
This usually comes from everyday folks supporting and caring about Spider-Man, like the guy in the elevator, or the kids he saves in the street, or this woman who cheers him on. But it's best represented in two scenes, and I think you already know the ones that I'm talking about. In the climax of the first movie, when Spider-Man is simultaneously rescuing Mary Jane and a tram full of kids from the Green Goblin while dangling from the 59th Street Bridge, a crowd of New Yorkers jump in to help him, throwing stuff at the Green Goblin to distract him. And here, those teeming masses that Norman Osborn tried to convince Peter to leave behind are embracing him as one of their own. Throughout the whole movie, they've been there on the periphery, like a whole story in the margins, about Spider-Man's relationship with the people of the city. And since he has made his choice to side with the everyman over the elites, they come to his defense. Sure, it might be a little corny, but having lived in this city for 10 years, except for that time I was stranded on an island, it is a pretty perfect example of something that I have found to be true about New Yorkers. Yeah, they might seem rude or cold or unfriendly, but when someone needs help, they will immediately jump in to lend a hand. And then, in Spider-Man 2, Raimi takes this idea one step further. At the end of the big action sequence where Spider-Man rescues a train full of innocent passengers, he faints from the physical exertion, and the passengers catch him and carry him to safety. And this time, his mask has come off, and suddenly these people are face to face not just with Spider-Man, but Peter Parker. Suddenly, he's no longer a superhero, he's just a guy. As one passenger says,
"He's just a kid. No older than my son."
So yeah, they might be jerks to him sometimes, but he's one of them. Because as Mayor Lenny in Ghostbusters 2 says,
Being miserable and treating other people like dirt is every New Yorker's God-given right.
And there's one more scene that I want to highlight because I think it might secretly be the most important one of these. And it's the kind of scene that I can imagine studio executives immediately saying should be cut from the movie. The kind of scene that honestly is kind of impossible to imagine in a 2022 blockbuster superhero movie. It's the scene in Spider-Man 2 where Peter is at his lowest point. He's quit being Spider-Man, he's failed at everything, he's just feeling absolutely like shit. And then Ursula, his neighbor, Mr. Ditkovich's daughter, knocks on his door to just offer him a piece of cake. There's no secret message in the cake, it has nothing to do with Doc Ock, this is not part of a romantic subplot, it doesn't actually move the plot forward at all. It's just a small gesture of kindness, not to him as a superhero, just to him as a person. It's just a moment of someone showing they care about him. And this small moment is the first step in Peter regaining his confidence and caring again. And it doesn't come from Aunt May or Mary Jane, none of the main characters. It comes from his neighbor, one of the regular people, the small roles that fill out this world. The kind of roles that we don't really see very much anymore. In the years since Raimi's trilogy ended, superhero movies, especially those produced by Marvel Studios, have come to dominate cinema and TV, and yet they've mostly left ordinary people behind. In these movies, battles seem to take place far away from innocent bystanders, in fields or deserts or on beaches. And even the regular people in these stories often end up becoming super people themselves sooner or later.
I'm magic now.
These are stories about characters who save and protect the everyman, but we no longer know who the everyman is. For instance, in Spider-Man Far From Home, that's the second MCU one, the extras cannot seem to leave the frame fast enough, whether it's for dialogue scenes between the main characters, or even for action scenes where they're in danger. It's like they're an inconvenience and the movie doesn't want to deal with them. But the background of the Raimi trilogy tells a different story, even when it's out of focus. Like, look at them back there. Yes, in Spider-Man Homecoming, you have that early montage of Spidey in Queens interacting with New Yorkers as he tries his hand at street-level heroism, something he's actually trying to escape and get away from, but we'll get to that. But these people mostly disappear after that. And if you look at the way some of his scenes are staged, something feels a little off. Like in this scene where Peter walks into his local deli. He has a funny interaction with the owner, Mr. Delmar, but the problem is no one in the scene feels like they have any personality or life outside of just being set dressing for a scene about Peter Parker. Like this guy waits for Peter to enter the store before he moves. This woman behind him stands almost completely still for the whole scene. We don't even see Mr. Delmar until the conversation begins, so he feels like he exists only to interact with Peter. In comparison, look at this scene at Joe's Pizza from Spider-Man 2. The customers are all either eating or ordering, the employees are working, everyone has something to do. Everyone in these movies feels like they have a life outside of Peter, which not only makes them feel more realistic, but adds to the sense that everyone is too preoccupied with themselves to care about him. And that's kind of the problem with how the MCU version of Spider-Man is presented. Peter, even though he should be a nobody, always feels like the most important person in the room, kind of like Tony Stark. In a way, it's kind of fitting, because his first MCU film is about him wanting to be one of the elites. But the fact is, he isn't. So the movie's framing works against this idea. And while he changes his mind at the end of the movie, for no apparent reason, this happens after he protects a billionaire's belongings from a disgruntled former construction worker far away from any civilians. In the second movie, he's on vacation visiting tourist spots, so he doesn't have much chance to interact with the teeming masses. Also, in this one, Aunt May is dating Iron Man's best friend. And then in the third film, Peter is a huge celebrity, the furthest thing from an everyman. It takes 3 full movies and some magical amnesia for him to even live in a space where he feels the pinch in his wallet, something the Raimi films do constantly, with the production design of his crumbling, shitty apartment. But in the MCU, where Peter lives is always just kinda nice and nondescript. Now, to be fair, the Raimi series isn't always perfect when it comes to depictions of normal folks. Like Spider-Man 3 is a lot less about New York and New Yorkers than the first 2. In that one, people gather to watch the battles, but it feels a bit too clean and rehearsed, like they're on a soundstage instead of a bustling city. Although that said, the third film is where you get some great character moments involving Mr. Ditkovich and Ursula, so it does still retain the element of Peter's character and story being reflected in the people around him. Ditkovich, played by Latvian actor Elja Baskin, is such a perfectly cast role because he seems like exactly the kind of grumpy, weathered Eastern European landlord or superintendent that you'd find in New York. And from the moment you first meet him, it feels like he has this rich and fascinating life behind closed doors. Literally. Like, I would watch an entire spin-off about what's going on at that table. So even while the movies can be campy and comic booky and melodramatic, the city they're showing feels lived in and realistic. But of course, when you're dealing with a real place and its real people, especially at the time these movies were being made, certain real topics become unavoidable. One sec, my room service is here. Hello? To get serious for a moment, you can't mention New York in the early 2000s without discussing the one event that changed the city, the country, and the modern world. I'm talking, of course, about the release of the song Hero by Chad Kroeger featuring Josie Scott, lead single from the Spider-Man soundtrack. And also 9/11. As you probably know, the early trailers and posters for Spider-Man prominently featured the World Trade Center, but those were taken out of circulation soon after September 11th. The movie was mostly complete by the time the attacks happened, but there were still a handful of scenes left to be reshot, and one of them was that scene on the 59th Street Bridge, where a bunch of working-class New Yorkers come to Spidey's aid and yell the famous lines,
one of us, you mess with all of us!
Only in New York, baby. Now, if you go back to the original shooting script from earlier in the production, these lines were not in it. They were added after September 11th, presumably as a way to capture New York's resilient spirit in the aftermath. But the bridge scene isn't the only thing that makes a statement about the city. Even though the movie was almost entirely written and filmed prior to September 2001, it feels like a definitive, almost optimistic portrayal of the New York that the world would witness in the months after 9/11. As one of the first major blockbuster depictions of New York after the attacks, it captures not only the moments of heroism that recall New York's real-life first responders, like cops and firefighters and Spider-Man himself charging heroically into a burning building, but its people. Just its regular, everyday people on a normal workday being bothered by a camera crew asking them questions about Spider-Man. It's like what you would see on the streets of Manhattan on any other day. This brief montage of people being interviewed about Spider-Man is, dare I say, important. It creates a living, breathing tapestry and makes the city feel alive, like it has so much more going on just off screen. Just as much as the scenes of heroism and people coming together, this is just as vital a reflection of New York because it felt normal. And the thing is, in Spider-Man 2, which was written and shot entirely after 9/11, Raimi would call back to some of these ideas in a different context. Like Peter Parker has decided to give up being Spider-Man, and for a brief moment in time, everything seems okay. But soon, reality begins to seep in. Peter is a good guy at heart, and even without his great powers, he has a responsibility. When he runs into a burning building once again, he makes it out alive with a child in his arms, but the nearby firefighters mention that
some poor soul got trapped on the 4th floor, never made it out.
It's a sobering reflection on what the image of a burning building actually means for New York in a post-9/11 world. Regular people, like the lady playing her violin, another quintessentially New York sight, go from optimistically singing about Spider-Man to lamenting the absence of goodness and heroism, a pessimistic outlook that reflected what a lot of people were feeling at the time, which makes Peter's eventual return as Spider-Man all the more cathartic. But that's just the Raimi movies in isolation. How do they live up to other depictions of post-9/11 New York? Well, as shocking as this may be, there aren't a lot of good ones. You have your movies about the event itself, like Oliver Stone's World Trade Center. You have a bunch of war movies about America's response, and you have some really weird ones, like Remember Me with its 9/11 twist ending, and Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close with its shot of a CGI Tom Hanks falling out of the towers. But very few New York movies written after 9/11 truly feel like they capture anything about the city itself. You could say that Kenneth Lonergan's Margaret is about post-9/11 New York, but in a roundabout way because the tragedy its main character witnesses is one person being hit by a bus. The movie is a masterpiece, but it's not really a direct confrontation of the attacks. But there is one movie that actually kinda makes for the perfect parallel to Raimi's Spider-Man, and that is Spike Lee's 25th Hour. See, this is a bit of a weird one because the script was complete before 9/11, and the book it's based on obviously had nothing to do with the events. It's the story of a man named Monty Brogan, who's spending his last day of freedom with his friends before he's shipped off to an upstate penitentiary. Monty thinks he's too pretty for prison, so he wants his friends to beat him to a pulp and make him ugly. Fun fact, Tobey Maguire actually wanted to play this role before he got too busy with Spider-Man, so there's another connection. Anyway, 25th Hour was in pre-production when the attacks happened, but rather than ignore it, Spike Lee decided to work them into the background of the whole movie, creating a connection between a man who feels shattered and wants his appearance to mirror the brokenness he feels inside, and a city that feels broken too. Even without the new setting, it's a story about finding a way to survive when things feel hopeless and confusing. The book also contains the infamous "fuck you" monologue, where Monty expresses his rage and frustration at every type of New Yorker from every borough. And while writer David Benioff, yes, that David Benioff, originally was going to cut it, Spike Lee insisted on keeping it. The result is a montage whose delivery is brimming with anger, but where the images feel disconnected from that anger, since they paint a vibrant and diverse portrait of a city and its people. It represents the kind of uncomfortable mixed feelings a lot of New Yorkers were trying to work through at that time, a mix of festering rage and the struggle to recognize optimism and beauty. In concept, it's also a perfect stylistic companion to Raimi's interview montage, since both are kinda documentarian-esque portraits of the city through its people. While neither story started out being about 9/11, they both ended up being important reminders that people desperately needed. One is about what it feels like to be a New Yorker on the city's worst day, and the other is about what it's like to be a New Yorker every day. Superhero movies may be about gods and technology and amazing abilities, but they don't fully work unless they're about people. 2022 has been a big year for Sam Raimi fans. Last December, Spider-Man No Way Home kicked it off by reminding us why we liked his take on the character so much, and then earlier this summer, Raimi returned to the Marvel Universe with Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, his first film in 9 whole years. And look, I had a lot of fun with that movie, and it was mostly for Raimi's gleeful, inventive directing. But I will say, one thing it was missing was the attention paid to the civilians and the feeling of a larger community surrounding the heroes. Even though it mostly takes place in New York, or 3 different New Yorks in 3 different dimensions, the populations of each of them feel pretty anonymous in that typical MCU way. Raimi snuck in a bit of character here and there, like Bruce Campbell as the immediately iconic Pizza Papa, and a few more shots of people on the street reacting than you'd see in the usual Marvel movie. Like, you can even hear this one guy audibly say, "Wow." But it seems like he was trying to stick to the assignment and not push his own take too much. Which is kind of a shame, seeing as we've spent the past, I don't know, half hour or so talking about how Raimi used to make his people matter more. And it's something that I keep thinking about being back here. During that year and a half stranded on the island, I would have given anything to talk to someone, to have my life filled with a vibrant cast of characters, like a friend, or a neighbor, or a boss. Hey, I'd even take a pushy landlord demanding rent. And now here I am, surrounded by 8 million people with no rent to give. I feel more alone than ever. So hey, on a slightly happier note, I spent the morning putting together something that I think is pretty exciting that I want to tell you about. Now on this channel, we love talking about movies and filmmaking and the art of directing. You know, cinema. And we're always discussing movies that already exist that other people have already made. But what if you want to make your own movie? Because I know for a fact that a lot of people who watch this channel are filmmakers themselves, or at least aspiring filmmakers, and so I'm here to help. By now, I'm sure you're familiar with Nebula, the creator-owned streaming platform that I helped build that now has over 500,000 paying subscribers. Well, earlier this year, Nebula launched a whole new feature called Nebula Classes that is the biggest expansion of the platform to date. And here, your favorite creators teach you how to do what they do. So think masterclass, but with your favorite online video creators. And now, I have a class of my own. It's called How to Make a Movie, and it covers in great detail pretty much every part of making a movie, especially one with little to no budget. From writing the script, to organizing the shoot, to lighting, to choosing shots, to working with actors, to getting the darn thing finished. Because as someone who has actually made a complete feature-length film, look, I've been through it, and so I'm qualified to talk about it. This class is everything that I wish someone had told me before I made a movie. And I may have gone a little overboard with this one. See, most Nebula classes are like 30 to 60 minutes long. My class is over 80 minutes long. So yeah, I made a feature-length class about how to make a movie. Look, I want it to be comprehensive, and I want you to get your money's worth. I'm not saying this is better than 4 years at a top film school, but I can honestly say there is more good practical advice in this class than I got from many of my college film classes. And this is a lot cheaper than those were. An annual plan for Nebula Classes for a full year is less than $150. But if you use the link in the description, nebula.app/Patrick H. Willems, down there, you can get a whole year for only $119. And if you're already a Nebula subscriber with the basic version, it only costs $99 to upgrade to classes for a full year. New classes drop every week, and they are all shot and produced in-house by the Nebula Classes team and have crazy high production values, so these things look good. Like we shot my class with 3 cameras. The lineup of classes right now from people like Legal Eagle, Alex the Low Spec Gamer, or Sam from Wendover Productions is ridiculously good, and it's only going to get better from here. And of course, since Classes is part of Nebula, you'll also get everything you would normally get with Nebula, like the extended ad-free cut of this video. That's right, there's a whole other section of this video you haven't seen, plus, I don't know, the movie I made, and it's available pretty much everywhere with apps for iPhone, iPad, Android TV, Apple TV, Roku, and many more. So again, go to nebula.app/Patrick H. Willems to get 20% off an annual plan, and check out my class. Okay, so after all that talking, I'm gonna go check out that room service. Thank you for watching. Bye.
Yeah, we've got a serious problem with these mad action figures. There's only 12 points of articulation, and I was very clear we need at least 50. Most of them on his... I gotta call you back. He's back.